Well, welcome back. Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020. One of my friends I talk to regularly, a moderate Republican in California who didn't like Trump in 2016 but has now come to be a supporter of his, wrote me this morning, "How do so many Americans support convicting the president? This is all such baloney." He didn't write the word baloney, but you take his point. I think my response to him was about right on. When the anti-Republican forces, when the progressives run all of our education systems, all of our mass media, all of our entertainment, and about 90% of our C-suites and human resources department, it's quite incredible any Republicans get elected anywhere, ever. It's quite amazing Donald Trump is even president now. It's kind of like when a car breaks down, we get angry if we aren't mystified, when in fact, when we think of all we ask of our cars and all that they do, we should be amazed and mystified that they ever work at all. I think that's something Click and Clack once said. But let's look at the polling for just a second, shall we? Here's the latest, quoting Politico. A slim plurality of registered voters favor the president's conviction and removal from office, though overall support for that has dipped, according to the latest Politico Morning Consult poll. The survey, conducted beginning Friday, one day after senators were sworn in for the trial through Sunday, found 40% of voters in favor of Trump's removal and 45% opposed. But now get this. A Political Morning Consult poll in the immediate aftermath of the House vote to impeach president found that the voters backed removal 52% to 43%. And a later poll conducted earlier in the month after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi delayed sending the articles of impeachment to the Senate found that support for removal had dropped 3 points to 49%, with the percentage of voters opposed to removal remaining roughly the same. So you see, support has constantly gone steadily downward, from 52% to 47%. And this after gobs and gobs, plethoras of nonstop coverage and encouragement for this since October of last year. One might even say that the day Donald Trump was inaugurated, over 300 calls for impeachment by House and Senate members of the Democratic Party have taken place since January of 17. But in earnest, on the latest charges regarding Ukraine, it's been since October. I think I'm right here. There is at once the common sense of the American people, but there is also, as I said, every education system, every part of the media, every part of entertainment, and 90% probably of corporate America. Plus, let us not forget the entirety of the Democratic Party. That's a lot of common sense to fight, never mind just conservatism. And yet there is not a majority that wants the U.S. Senate to convict Donald Trump for impeachment. And the numbers that do have gone steadily downward. Why? Well, the common sense of everything I've been saying, for one, to repeat, an election comes in just over 9 months, but the Democrats want you to put the election in the hands of 100 senators, 100 senators, I guess, and 435 members of Congress. Could anything be any more elitist and power-grabbing than that? Could anything be more, in the parlance of our time, designed to interfere with or to tamper with our sacred elections? End of day, let's break it down to one sentence. An American president delayed foreign aid for 5 weeks to Ukraine in an amount that is 0.57% of the budget of the Department of Education, or 0.0088% of the U.S. budget. Oh, and after being the first president to give Ukraine any lethal military aid whatsoever, though Ukrainians did beg for it from Barack Obama, who would not give it in any number of weeks in any amount. Somehow that was not impeachable, but this is. And somehow Joe Biden pressuring Ukraine to fire a state prosecutor in order for them to receive foreign economic aid from the United States is okay. But asking Ukraine to look into corruption before they receive their money is not. There is, of course, one big difference. Joe Biden required a quid pro quo to give Ukraine United States aid, and it is fully disputed that Donald Trump did. And indeed, Ambassador Gordon Sondland said Donald Trump said there was to be no quid pro quo. And the president of Ukraine said there was never any pressure. And there is no evidence that any pressure was ever applied or obeyed to get the money, which is false and not the case with Joe Biden, who did brag that they fired the prosecutor and got the money. How did John Lennon put it? Nobody told me there'd be days like these. Strange days indeed. Strange days indeed. But I do hope this poll of 47 to 45% regarding conviction for impeachment explains, explicates one big thing. You don't engage in impeachment, an extraordinary constitutional remedy for things like treason and bribery, with such a divided viewpoint in the American mind. Why do you think the Constitution requires a supermajority vote to convict for impeachment in the Senate? Because this is not a light and transient remedy in our democracy. It should be overwhelmingly obvious and clear. Beyond even the preponderance of the evidence standard, it needs to be clear and convincing at a minimum. 47 to 45 ain't that, especially when the 47 is shrinking and the 45 is growing. You don't do an extraordinary power grab, taking the vote and voice from the American people on such a thin reed. Unless, of course, you are a progressive, an elitist, someone who has contempt for the American people. Which kind of brings us to the Never Trump Republicans, wherein I see similar contempt for the American people as in the Democratic Party. David Galertner, professor of Yale, had it exactly right when he wrote, quote, "My job as a voter is to choose the candidate who will do best for America. I'm sorry about the coarseness of the unconstrained average American that Mr. Trump conveys. On the other hand, many of his opponents worry too much about what other people think. I would love the esteem of France, Germany, and Japan, but I don't find myself losing sleep over it. The difference between citizens who hate Mr. Trump and those who can live with him, whether they love or just tolerate him, comes down to their views of the typical American, the farmer, the factory hand, the auto mechanic, the machinist, teamster, shop owner, clerk, software engineer, infantryman, truck driver, housewife. The leftist intellectuals I know say they dislike such people insofar as they tend to be conservative Republicans. They know how appalling such people are with their stupid guns and loathsome churches. They have no money or permanent grievances to make them interesting and no Twitter followers to speak of. They skip Davos every year and they watch Fox News. Probably listen to conservative talk radio, too. Not even the very best has the dazzling brilliance of Chuck Schumer, not to mention a Michelle Obama. In truth, they're as dumb as sheep. Mr. Trump reminds us who the average American really is. Not the average male American or the average white American. We know for sure that come 2020, intellectuals will be dumbfounded at the number of women and blacks who will vote for Mr. Trump. He might be realigning the political map, plain average Americans of every type versus fancy ones. Many Americans who were ashamed when Ronald Reagan was elected too. A movie actor, they said. But the new direction he chose for America was a big success, and Reagan turned into a great president. Evidently, this country was intended to be run by amateurs after all, by plain citizens, not just lawyers, not just bureaucrats. Those who voted for Mr. Trump and will vote for his candidates this November worry about the nation, not its image. But you get the snide snickering and pseudo-sophistication of the women of The View and the men of Bill Maher's show, and you get your Jonah Goldbergs. I wonder if they will ever tire of trying to explain to tens of millions of people why they are wrong. Probably not, because it's become a good living. But Jonah writes this morning, speaking for most of the Never Trump Republicans, I think, and about how we arrived at this point of an impeachment trial. He writes, quote, "I've long argued that Donald Trump's presidency will end poorly because he's a person of bad character, and I still think that's true," close quote. That's Jonah Goldberg. Does anyone remember last column he wrote about Adam Schiff's character, or Ilhan Omar's character, or any of the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings? You can see the contempt when Jonah goes on to write, quote, "Because Trump is unteachable about how the presidency and our constitutional system are supposed to work, politicians and media figures have dropped their long-held views on foreign policy, the national debt, trade, and even the need for basic civility in order to get in sync with the president," close quote. Well, not that many politicians have, and even fewer in the media, but can you not see the contempt? Donald Trump is unteachable about how the presidency and how our system of government work? Funny how such an idiot could do something Jonah could not, which was banish the Clintons from politics. Funny how such an idiot could understand how to appeal to the American people to actually win the presidency. And as far as unteachable about how the presidency works, funny how consequential this presidency has been in everything from foreign affairs to anti-terrorism to the economy to the judiciary. Donald Trump has given conservatives their dream palace of objectives. Not bad for someone unteachable. Not bad for someone unteachable about the presidency and our constitutional system either. But the contempt is palpable. It's not really contempt for Trump, though. It's contempt for you. I'm Seth Leibsohn. We'll be right back. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about my friends at Guns Etc. They are true American patriots. They strongly support our president, and they have over 10,200 square feet of firearms and firearm accessories. Please take my advice and stop by their store, which is a symbol of American freedom, or visit them at gunsetcetera.com and have access to over $350 million in firearms merchandise.